I'd like to end this lesson by considering multimodal interventions. Why? Well, because actually that's just the reality in everyday clinical work. Individuals with ADHD will follow multiple modalities of treatment. These can include medication, can include psychotherapy, group psychotherapy, it can include parent training, it can include teacher support as well, or in-school support as well. So actually the reality is that we are always delivering some kind of multimodal treatment. So in effect, what do we know about multimodal treatment? Well, the best way to answer that question is to focus on one study that is a longitudinal study that included a lot of participants and on which we have now 16 years of data that is currently published. So this study is the MTA study, the multimodal treatment of children and adolescents with ADHD. It's been running since the 90s. It's involved 539 children, initially aged between 7 and 10 years of age, and it delivered 4 types of treatment, some of which were individual modalities, some of which were multimodal modalities, but all of these treatments lasted for 14 months. Okay, so let's look at the results of this study because they're really interesting. To understand the results, you first need to understand the 4 treatment deliveries, the 4 types of treatment that were included. So the first type of treatment is a specialized medical treatment concerning the titration of medication to the optimal dose. Okay, so it's medication only, but delivered in a specialized way. The second modality is the behavioral modality. So this modality is a bit more complex. It involves, first of all, a summer camp for children where they work on specific skills that have to do with ADHD. It's a specialized intervention. Another specialized intervention will include the parents. Parents are going to be involved in parent groups, so 27 groups and 7 individual sessions with parents, as well as interventions on the school grounds. So therapists coming into the classroom and also having fortnightly meetings with the teachers. So this triple type behavioral intervention was the second group of intervention in the MTA study. The third group of intervention is actually the combination of 1 and 2. So it's specialized medication procedure plus specialized behavioral components. Okay? And finally, the 4th group is the treatment as usual group. So these are individuals that have received treatment, but it's not specifically specialized as the groups 1 and 2 and 3 are. So now we're ready for the results. Let's take a look at this table where you see that the results are framed in terms of parent evaluation as well as teacher evaluations. First of all, if we look at the top of this table, we see the diagnostic symptoms. So we see hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention. And at a glance, what you can see is that group 1, so which is the medication-only group, and group 3, which is the medication plus behavioral specialized components, have the advantage here over the other modalities of treatment. This is true for the evaluation of teachers. Now, when we look at the parental evaluation, we see that for inattention only, we have medication, specialized medication that has the advantage. So these results at the end of therapy, and which last until about 2 years following the beginning of therapy, so that's 10 months after the end of therapy, these are results on the main ADHD symptoms. Now let's switch to the bottom part of the table where you see associated problems. So these are behavioral problems and these are relational problems, either with parents or with peers. When you look at the table at a glance, you can identify the group 3, which is the combined interventions. That's medication plus specialized behavioral treatment. Carries an advantage for all of the symptoms. Some evaluated by the parents, the behaviors and the interactions with parents, and the interactions with peer as evaluated by the teachers. So all in all, one could say that from the end of the treatment to 10 months after, probably the best intervention is the combined intervention of specialized medication procedure as well as behavioral specialized procedures. Okay, so now let's move on further in time and look at the results, the differences between the groups at 36 months after the beginning of treatment, but also at 96 months, so at 6 to 8 years after treatment. What can be observed? Well, not much in terms of group differences, meaning that the interventions at this time are not different from one to another. And the reason for that is that at the end of the study, at the 14-month point, individuals had the choice to participate in other types of treatment. And what that creates is an erasing of the differences, a disappearance of the differences between groups as originally observed. One thing, though, that is observed at 6 to 8 years is that when the child receives a diagnosis of combined inattentive and hyperactive ADHD, then these children usually tend to do a bit less well than other individuals at 6 to 8 years. Okay, so now let's end with a very recent publication showing data from 16 years after the initial treatment. This is a very interesting study because it answers not only questions about treatment itself and multimodal treatment, but it also gives a window into the natural course of development of ADHD and associated problems. So what do we see here in this study that is very recent? So first off, the authors are interested in identifying patients, individuals that are in remission. How do they define that? They say that remission can be defined by having 4 or less diagnostic symptoms, because we know that once we have 5 or 6 symptoms, we are very close to clinical diagnosis. So over the 16 years where the participants had a number of different evaluations, remission was calculated that way, and they found that only 30% of individuals had a remission period within the study time. Within these 30%, we have 6 out of 10, so that's 60% experiencing a remission interval are going to go back to clinical level manifestation of symptoms in their ADHD. So what does this tell us? It tells us that the diagnosis itself can be, in a sense, unstable, that individuals, 3 out of 10, can experience significant periods of remission, but that most of these individuals are going to go back to facing difficulties with their ADHD symptoms. And in a sense, it underlines the necessity to learn to live with the ADHD symptoms. But if we go a bit further in the results of this study, we can identify 2 further groups. One in which the diagnosis remains stable over all of the evaluations during 16 years. That's 10.8 percent of the sample, and also individuals that once they're in remission actually stay in remission, and that's 9.1% of individuals. So that's really interesting indeed, because we really have a longitudinal view on the developmental course of individuals with ADHD. What can we say in summary? Well, we can perhaps recommend that indeed multimodal interventions that are specialized both in terms of medication, behavioral treatment, actually seem to do better in comparison to other modalities of treatment. But we can also say that actually ADHD is quite stable, and that we need to further our development of interventions to increase the number of individuals that go into remission, and also increase the time of remission and the durability of remission to decrease the burden of ADHD.